The vector workflow in Adobe Fresco has a lot of cool features that really help with hand lettering. In this video, I'm gonna show you some of those. To get started, I'm just gonna go over some of the basic things that you can do, and then I'll go into some longer form process things, creating some pieces using some vintage lettering examples that I got from the RetroSupply Co Lettering Library, which is just this massive archive of like over 100 lettering and typography books that they've collected, which is crazy, but it's another topic on its own. Let's dive into these vector features in Fresco. Okay, so I have this rough sketch here for these letters, and I'm gonna use some of the vector tools to tighten this up, make it nice and clean. A lot of the stuff I'm gonna show you isn't necessarily vector specific, but some of it is. So you could use it in other applications as well. The first thing I'm gonna talk about is something that I lean on a lot with the vector brushes, and that is the smoothing. If you're new to Fresco and you turned on a brush and you felt like there was a ton of lag, it's not likely lag. More likely, it's that the smoothing is turned all the way up. Fresco just does smoothing differently than something like Procreate. In Procreate, smoothing is called streamline, and it's like a individual brush setting. Whereas in Fresco, you can control it overall for all your brushes. How it works is you draw and it corrects your line and smooths it out. So if it's turned all the way up, it's really smoothing out your line and cleaning it up as you draw. Whereas if you use a brush with a lot of streamline in Procreate, it sort of looks like you're pulling string over points or something like that. So when I'm working in vector, I always have a sketch done ahead of time. I can't sketch in vector, it's too final, and I just like that pencil feel. So I'll sketch in a raster brush, pencil brush, and then when I switch over to vector, I'm just doing a tightened up version. So I already know what I'm doing. So it's just about like being as efficient as I can in getting the cleanest possible lines. So I just crank the smoothing all the way up. So if this bugs you, you can turn it down a little bit. But if you're trying to get some really smooth lines and you don't have the iron smoothness, steadiness, give it a shot, it might help you out. Another great feature is the drawing aids down at the bottom right. If you go down here, you can choose the ellipse tool to get some of these curves nice and perfect. You can just rotate this shape tool, squish it, stretch it, do whatever you need until you get it in the right spot, and then you can use it to trace over. So as you're tracing with the ellipse tool, you don't have to worry about ending in the perfect spot because of the next feature that I'm going to talk about, which is the vector trimming. With vector trimming, you can just draw through a line, double tap the modifier button, which is that little circle. The first option is you'll see blue is highlighted in the middle of the circle. That turns your brush into an eraser. If you tap it again, the blue moves to the outer circle, and this is vector trimming mode. And here you just draw through the points you don't want, then they're gone. And this allows you to get really nice, sharp points. So combining this with the ellipses and having them overlap and then cutting where they intersect, you can get a really sharp, clean point. And since these letter forms are in script, something that is just a general lettering tip is that when you're doing things like this, you want to pay attention to where the letters are thick and where the letters are thin. This is based in how lettering was originally done with like a brush or a quill pen. The upstrokes would be thin as the brush is getting pulled, and then downstrokes would be thicker as the brush is being pushed down. Because we're used to seeing letters this way, following that to some degree will allow the letters to be a little bit easier to see and recognize. And this is helpful when you're combining letter forms and changing baselines and doing other things to sort of compromise the ease of readability, if you will. So when you're drawing your letters, think about, would this be an upstroke if I was doing it with a brush, or a downstroke? As you can see, the way I draw letters is like I draw anything else. I don't letter like I'm doing traditional calligraphy, I'm drawing shapes, but I'm thinking about those shapes in regard to how they would be done if they were painted with a brush. You feel me? All right, so I'm gonna take some of these things that I showed you here and apply them to some other scenarios where we're gonna recreate some new lettering based on some vintage references that I pulled from the RetroSupply Co Lettering Library. And we're gonna create some new things using those type references and then creating new characters that don't exist within the samples that we have because they say something different. And if I just confused you, just come on, come with me, we'll do it. So I got a screenshot of this old lettering, I guess a logo for a place called White's Lunch. I don't wanna eat lunch there, but I kind of like some of these letters. Especially I love this H, I think it's pretty cool. I don't really care about the lunch lettering, but I'm thinking we'll just do heck yeah, because heck yeah, why not? And I went ahead and traced the H and traced the E, and now I'm at a point where I don't have any other letters to trace. I need to do the word heck, and we don't even have a C or a K. What the heck? No problem. We can do it from what we have. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate this E, drag one of them over to the E, tap the modifier to lock my axis. So what I'm gonna do is just come in here and erase this connecting point. To match the style, I'm thinking I'm gonna try to have the C kind of come down in a little bit of a curly Q, just to match that retro style, and then we can see how much we should trim it. Cool, all right, that works. We are close, but we don't have a K, but we have a heck and H, and we can turn that into a K. Let's duplicate our H. We can adjust that spacing later if we need to, but now we've got hetch. So what I'm gonna do now, cut off this part over here. So I'm thinking maybe if we rotate this, now I think that is sort of getting there, but I'm just gonna cut it up a little bit more. Move this up. So I'm just sort of drawing in, and I think that's looking pretty good. I think what we just want now is that bottom little tail thing that the H has. So we'll just come over here, grab that, copy, drag it over to the end. So my plan now is to erase this sharp angle because we're not gonna have that sharp angle here. And then I'm just gonna connect this point, go like that, boop, boop, boop. And then we'll just trace this back over. And now we've got a pretty good heck and heck. We just need to clean it up a little bit more. Gonna make the brush a little bit smaller and just trim off this part. So I think we're not gonna want the end to be like that. I think it's rounded like that for the H because it kind of flows back like that. But I think it shouldn't do that if it's just ending in a flat position. We just sort of round this out and then see how that looks. I think that's it. What the heck? Okay, so I wanna do something with this Y thing. So I think to draw this shape, I'm just gonna use the symmetry to make it easier. So let's turn on symmetry. I'm gonna use this move guide option and then drag this over. All right, we got our shape here. If you turn a W sideways, it's like an E. We could have like a long E with like a Y and an A at the end, and then it's like, heck yeah. Does that sound good to you? Heck yeah! Okay, so let's rotate this. It's a pretty good heckin' E. Let's duplicate it and see if we can make a Y from this situation. Rotate this back, like that. Let's come in here and erase this part off. Fill it back in. I'm going to copy this bottom part, and then I'm going to take just the top part, copy, paste. So we're gonna use this to get the top of the Y, and then we grab this, and then we turn that into a Y by connecting all this stuff. Okay, so I'm just cleaning up this center area, and then just sort of making this part match that overall style where it's just like inset. Okay, okay. I don't hate it yet, do you? Let's make an A. Turn this thing back on, flip it. All right, so I'm gonna cut that off, erase that, paste. Okay, and now we just need a connector bar for that A. So I'm thinking to keep the consistency, we'll just take a little chunk out of this thing. Okay, I think it's kind of cool. Maybe that E is a little too long, but let's see if we can make some sort of like little lockup between these two words. Heck yeah. Okay, so I went ahead and made this bad lettering based on this Mayfair type example that I found. And then I also have this cool Franks lettering, but I don't want it to say Franks because that doesn't make any sense. I think it should just say pretty bad. Now, when you have type on a curve like this, you can see here that it like starts big and gets small. So we've got this curved baseline and then a curved X height or X line going across the top, and that sort of pinches down. So we can use the shapes drawing aids here to make a guide as a reference point for when we put in our new letters, so we can get them to match that curve nicely without having to like try to eyeball match these letters. So we'll come down to the bottom to the drawing aids, then get the circle. And here we're just gonna stretch it out until we find that curve. So I'm gonna go ahead to a new layer, I'm just gonna use my monoliner so it doesn't change in weight as I'm pushing. I'm just gonna draw that circle, tap on this scale thing, and we can come over here and make our new curve for the rest of these letters. Now we can draw that one in, then maybe I'll draw another one for the cap height. We can see here that it's just using straight up and down verticals. So this is gonna be super helpful as we're drawing in those other letters. Because this goes on a curve and they get smaller and change size a little bit, I wanna work sequentially. So now we can just do the same process that we did before, start tracing over these letters to make our new ones. So let's start with the P. Okay, so for the top of the P, I think what I'll do is on a new layer, I will trace the curve of this R, scale it up, and now we can match the rest of it, connect these lines back in. Come down here and use the vector trimming, trim that stuff off, and now we can fill that in. And that looks pretty dang good to me. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just gonna take this Frank's lettering and move it because, so what I can do here is just scale this down until it lines up with those guidelines that we made. And because the angle changes a little bit, we're gonna have to do that bottom part on our own. Okay, so now we need an E, which we don't have. So I think what I will do is just do like that little curve thing coming in, and then we can do that when we get to the bottom as well. And then we just need to like figure out what the rest of the letter would look like. We can take hints from other letters, like the F has got that middle bar there. So I'm just gonna come over here and trace that, and then we can bring this in for the top. So what I'm gonna do is trace that the top of the X height there and do that at the bottom as well. I'm gonna pull straight lines in like this and then just sort of match that curve. Okay, so now we just need some T's. So because we're gonna have two T's like this, I think what I'll do is try to duplicate this part. I think what we'll do is the same thing we did with the E, where we just trace that top line a little bit, then maybe we can match the angle and that'll make it feel even more consistent. And then we can duplicate this T, so it's gonna have to be smaller. So we can trim that part off, but then we need to replace this. Get rid of this and then just like add in what we're now missing. Okay, and now we just need to figure out a Y. Maybe we can do something with this part of the N. Since we're just using it as a reference, let's just make a selection of that area like this. This way we can see if it's actually gonna help us. I think it might be able to work. Let's see. And there we go. Pretty bad. All right, so here's a cool script treatment that I found. It says drastic reductions. I don't want to go too far. I think I'm gonna change it to say terrible decision. All right, so I know I'm gonna need the D, so I may as well just draw that to get started. And we can go ahead and just fill this in. Because these look like they're roughly the same size, I think we can take from either line and move them together. I kind of want to get warmed up doing easier letters first, so I'm going to start doing the letters that we already have, and that's also going to get me more accustomed to the style of this lettering and like where the thicks and thins are and like angles and how it's drawn. It's just going to give me a little bit of mental muscle memory, if you will. So we're going to need an E right off the bat, so I'm going to draw this E here. Now this is a letter that, even if we're not using this exact letter, it might be helpful to have this shape to kind of take apart for future letters. So what I'm gonna do is duplicate that, and then we just know that we have that if we need it for something else. We do have an R, but it's at the beginning of a word, so it's gonna connect a little differently. So it's not gonna connect the way this E is, but we can take some cues from other letter combinations to make that work. So I'm just gonna trace it as is. Just grab the transform tool, and then just drag this down here. One thing that might be helpful to find out is how close these actually are in size. Visually, they look the same, but they might not be, and that would be helpful to know. So on a new layer, what I'm gonna do is just make a rectangular selection. That's the height of one of these letters. Then I'm gonna change it to multiply so we can see through. These letters down below are a little bit bigger. What I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna take this R, drag it over next to a letter that is close, maybe that U, and then I'm just gonna make it as big as that letter. And now we can bring it back over here and fit these together. So I'm gonna duplicate the R, and I'm going to go to the transform tool and then double tap the modifier to lock axis so that it stays right on the same line. Connect this in a line that looks a little bit more natural, and then just go in and erase the extra stuff. And now that's looking pretty good. And we've got an I, so that's great. So we're just gonna draw it. Instead of moving the letters to where we're gonna go, what I'm gonna do is take this whole thing and drag it over to the T, because we can use that line from the T as the beginning of the B. Okay, to do the rest of the B, we need a visual reference. And the closest thing we have is that D, but we can't really just flip it because the angle would be the wrong way. So I think what we can do is, let's drag it over to this O here. I think I want to just lower it a little bit, drawing a loop that matches to the line connecting to the next letter. And now I'm just gonna drag it back to the T to use as our L. And since we already have an extra E, we can turn that back on, drag that over to the end. And we need a reference for how this ends, and they both end in this kind of just sharp point. So I think what we'll do, just trace this one up here, and then we can bring it down here. I think that's looking pretty good. Now we need to address the T. Maybe use the lowercase t as a reference. So what I'm gonna try to do is trace this and then blow it up to match the size of the first character. And it looks like in both of these, that first start is very angular like that. So I'm gonna trace this vertical line in the R. Look at where this one overlaps. Erase this side of it and see if it looks too thin. That's looking pretty terrible. Good terrible. So I'm gonna bring the D back up where it was. And then what we can do is just come over to the terrible lettering that we did and copy this E. Actually, while we're here, we can get this I too. Put that there. Then we need a C. The C is the last letter, so it's got a weird end to it, so I'm gonna kind of ignore that. Take this part. Decisions is CI. What we can do, drag this over next to the I, and then we can use this to figure out how that should connect. And now we need an S, so I'm gonna turn off the DE for now, and then drag the C and the E and the I over to the S. Am I spelling decision right? I believe so. Drag this one down and size it using this other one. C-I-S-I. O-N. And look, we got an O-N right there. And this works out perfectly because this ends in an S, so we get that little sharp tail. Okay, and because we're going from line to line, we gotta make sure the sizing is right again. All right, so we can pull the DE back up and drag that over so that connects. There we go, terrible decisions. So I think this doesn't line up as well as the other one, so we could try to address it. What we can do now is like turn on our grids. You can see that this one's starting to angle down for some reason. And now we got some terrible decisions. So as you can see, all the vector stuff in Adobe Fresco really helps with hand lettering. If you are interested in my Adobe Fresco brush presets, before you click on the link below to possibly go and order some, why don't you just check out this video here where I show you how to make them yourself, and then you don't have to buy mine. Wait, is this how I do business? I'm told this is not how I succeed at business. Anyway, good talk.